Welcome to the Reasonable Southerner podcast. The South isn't all magnolias in the moonlight, but neither is it all racism and violence. We are just like you. My name is Frances Coleman. I share my insights about my life and yours. If you're an end times kind of Christian who's always on the lookout for signs that Jesus' return is imminent, you've got a lot on your plate these days. No doubt you're still reeling from the Supreme Court's decision 6 years ago to legalize same-sex marriage in all 50 states, which you view as anathema to God. You're probably appalled by statistics that show the number of churchgoers in America is declining, while the number of unmarried people who cohabitate and have children together is rising. You may also believe that the godless Democrats stole the 2020 election. Meanwhile, like the rest of us, you've been gobsmacked by the current global pandemic. And every time we turn around, there seems to be another natural disaster, ranging from fires in California, droughts throughout the West, and major hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, to freakish floods in places like New York City. Elsewhere in the world, we hear of tremendous political instability and rising totalitarianism, along with famine, disease, and, as the book of Matthew promised, wars and rumors of war. So I would agree with you that in many ways these are very difficult times we're living in. But please, don't tell me that all of this upheaval is God's judgment, God's wrath, or any other manifestation of his mood, or that it absolutely portends the end of the world. Because you're insulting my intelligence, not to mention everybody else's, and I believe you're insulting the Lord himself. I say this for two reasons. First, as a Christian of the Roman Catholic persuasion, I recall a particular verse in the 13th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, in which Jesus was speaking to his followers. Quote, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." Some portions of the Bible can be a little opaque, to say the least, but not this one. No one knows. Why would you believe that you've got an inside line on when the end will come? Didn't you notice that all the religions and cults that proclaim that the world would end on such and such a date were wrong? I mean, in spite of our bruises, we are still here, aren't we? As for the second reason, it is this. How can anybody who knows anything about world history say such a thing? And I don't mean you have to be a student of history. If you finish the 8th grade, then you should know enough history to understand that, while very serious to us, this pandemic, these natural disasters, and our changing societal mores are not unique. On the subject of wars, where shall I begin? The Crusades, perhaps? Historians estimate that, including soldiers and civilians, about 1.7 million people died during those unholy wars. Sadly, however, that's nothing compared to the so-called Black Death in the 14th century, with a death toll of anywhere from 75 million to 200 million people. They were usually too busy hauling off bodies to count them. That plague is considered the most devastating pandemic in human history. More recently, in the early part of the 20th century, the Spanish influenza killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide, according to the Centers for Disease Control, with about 675,000 of those deaths occurring in the United States. I could go on and on and on. More than 600,000 soldiers died in the U.S. Civil War. In World War II, estimates are all over the place. Some say more than 50 million people died, including soldiers and civilians. Others put the number at 75 million or more. And let's not forget the killing fields of the 1970s, in which soldiers of the Khmer Rouge butchered more than 1 million of their fellow Cambodians, or the Nazi extermination camps, in which at least 6 million Jews and several million non-Jews were murdered. On the subject of society, there's a saying that every generation believes it's the one that discovered sex. This generation also seems to believe that it's the one that discovered or uncovered homosexuality, cohabitation, out-of-wedlock children, extramarital affairs, premarital sex, and licentious behavior in general. This belief, of course, is laughable and also quite pathetic. Again, you don't have to be a genius to know these things. You just have to have paid attention in your high school literature and history classes. From the dawn of humankind, people have liked sex, all kinds of sex, and they have indulged in many varieties of sexual relationships. While you were paying attention in class, you may have also heard of the Great Fire of London in the 1600s, which gutted that medieval city. More recently, there was the hurricane of 1900, which struck Galveston, Texas, and is believed to have killed as many as 12,000 people. That number of deaths, of course, pales when compared to the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, in which fatalities are estimated at somewhere between 100,000 and 230,000 people. Earthquakes have long tormented humankind, of course, both in the past and more recently in places such as San Francisco, Mexico, South America, the Indian Ocean, and the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire. My point is, if the Lord is wanting to rattle our cages, He could use bigger and much more horrific events than what's going on these days to demonstrate His anger, to punish the human race, or to signal that the end is near. The COVID-19 pandemic, which has already killed many thousands of people around the world and may kill many thousands more, has got nothing on the Black Death or the Spanish flu. Our wars, our social upheavals, and sadly our natural disasters are nothing new either. In fact, though each of the wars, pestilences, and disasters that have tormented humankind has been unique in some ways, all have had at least one thing in common. They were frightening. And when humans are afraid, they look for explanations with which to reassure themselves, and they credit or blame the gods or God or nature or some other entity for conflicts, plagues, and afflictions. That's easier than accepting the fact that life is random and chaotic, and that we often don't have any control over it. Maybe some folks take comfort in the thought of an angry, petulant God who torments people in anticipation of the final curtain falling on the world as we know it. And maybe they feel better if they believe that they can read the Lord's mind and thus can prepare themselves for the end. If you're one of those folks, well, you can think whatever you like and shape God to be whomever you like if it makes you feel better. There are Southerners who believe handling snakes shows that they're mighty holy. I suppose it would be impolite to point out that the snakes spend a good while in the refrigerator to make them groggy and easy to handle. You can also be like me and believe that God is truly present in the sacraments. To some, that's as silly as snake handling. I do have a hard time believing God is like that petulant child who decides to reach down out of the clouds and thump whichever of us mere mortals happens to displease Him. I don't believe that bad things are God's punishment. I believe God loves each of us in a way that we can't begin to understand. He's not making us suffer because we have displeased Him by not sacrificing a sufficient number of virgins or burning enough unfortunate goats. The world is a place full of suffering. God does not visit it on us to punish us. God loves us. If you believe otherwise, that God does go about smiting those who dare displease Him, think what you will. But for the sake of the rest of us, please, kindly keep it to yourself. I'm Frances Coleman. I've worked for newspapers for more than 45 years, from Texas to my native Louisiana, and finally to my home near Mobile, Alabama. I've been a reporter, an editorial writer, a columnist, and an editorial page editor. I've commented on the BBC, been a guest on the Rachel Maddow Show, and had my column distributed nationwide. If you like this podcast, please follow it. It's free, and even if you don't like it, I hope you'll find it thought-provoking.